Alfred Jones was 34 years old when he discovered that the family he'd married into had been calculating his worth, not as a husband, not as a son-in-law, but as an asset to be liquidated. He stood frozen outside room 412 at St. Mary's Medical Center in downtown Chicago, his hand still reaching for the door handle, listening to his mother-in-law's voice drift through the crack in the doorway. "Flores, sweetheart, I know you think you love him, but let's be practical here," Patricia Whitmore said, her tone sharp despite the hospital gown she was wearing. "That man walked into our family with nothing. You gave him everything. Your name, your connections, your father's business opportunities. And what has he given you? A middle-class lifestyle when you deserve so much more." Alfred's blood ran cold. He'd come straight from his job as a senior electrical engineer at Morrison Technical Solutions, still wearing his work clothes, carrying the flowers he'd picked up from the hospital gift shop. Patricia had been admitted 2 days earlier with what the doctors suspected was a minor stroke. He'd rearranged his entire schedule to be here, to support his wife during this difficult time. And this was what they thought of him. "Mom, that's not fair." Flora's voice came next, but it was weak, uncertain. "Alfred works hard. He provides for us." "Provides?" Patricia let out a bitter laugh that echoed in the sterile hallway. "Darling, your father built Whitmore Enterprises from the ground up. That company is worth $47 million. Your trust fund alone could buy Alfred's entire neighborhood. And yet here you are, living in that modest 3-bedroom in Lincoln Park, driving a Honda, shopping at regular stores like some normal person?" Flores interrupted, but there was no real heat in her words. "Alfred makes $98,000 a year, Mom. That's a good salary." "It's pedestrian," Patricia snapped. "You were supposed to marry someone who could match what you brought to the table. Someone from our world. Do you know what Charlotte's husband does? He's a hedge fund manager. They just bought their second home in the Hamptons. And Melissa's fiancé, his family owns half the commercial real estate in Manhattan. What does Alfred have? A degree from a state school and a job that barely qualifies as professional class." Alfred felt his stomach twist into knots. He'd met Flores 7 years ago at a charity gala his company had sponsored, one of those corporate obligation events where Morrison Technical tried to schmooze with Chicago's elite. She'd been beautiful, intelligent, and refreshingly down-to-earth compared to the other wealthy attendees who'd look through him like he was furniture. She'd laughed at his jokes, seemed genuinely interested in his work designing electrical systems for commercial buildings, and told him she was tired of the superficial men in her social circle who only cared about pedigree and portfolio size. He'd fallen hard and fast, believing he'd found someone who valued substance over status. "I love Alfred," Flores said. But Alfred noticed she didn't say it with conviction. She said it like someone trying to convince themselves of a fact they weren't quite sure about anymore. "Love doesn't pay for the lifestyle you deserve," Patricia continued, her voice taking on that lecturing tone Alfred had heard 1,000 times at family dinners. "And let's talk about children. You're 32 years old. When you have kids, do you really want them growing up in that neighborhood? Going to public schools? Having a father who has to check his budget before buying them things? Your children should have the same advantages you had. Private schools, summer camps in Europe, connections that will serve them their entire lives. Alfred is careful with money because he grew up without much," Flores defended him. But again, her voice lacked strength. It was the voice of someone going through the motions. "His parents were immigrants from Taiwan. They worked in a restaurant in Chinatown. He put himself through college working 2 jobs." "Exactly my point," Patricia interrupted sharply. "He doesn't understand our world. He never will. And I've seen the way he looks at your father's business. Like he's calculating. Like he's waiting for his piece of it. Like he married you knowing exactly what you'd inherit someday." That was a lie. A complete, vicious lie. Alfred had never asked the Whitmores for anything. Not once in 6 years. He declined every offer of money, every suggestion that he join the family business in some manufactured position, every attempt to make him financially dependent on their wealth. When they'd offered to buy him and Flores a house as a wedding gift, he'd insisted on contributing his share of the down payment, $25,000 he'd saved over 5 years. When Richard Whitmore had suggested Alfred could do better than Morrison Technical and offered him a position at Whitmore Enterprises at nearly double his salary, Alfred had politely declined, saying he wanted to build his own career, prove himself on his own merits. Apparently, that independence had been interpreted as some kind of long con, some elaborate scheme to appear virtuous while secretly waiting to cash in. "What are you suggesting, Mom?" Flores asked, and Alfred's heart stopped beating for a moment. "I'm suggesting you think very carefully about your future," Patricia said slowly, deliberately. "You signed a prenuptial agreement, yes, but your father and I have been reviewing it with our attorneys. Spencer and Associates went through it last week. It's not as airtight as we thought when we had it drafted. There are provisions that could be problematic if you wait too long. The longer you're married, the more community property you accumulate, the more entangled everything becomes. And with your father's health situation, we need to think strategically about asset protection." Alfred's mind raced. The prenup. He remembered that conversation 6 years ago, 2 months before the wedding. The Whitmore family attorney, a stern man named Gerald Spencer, had presented him with a thick document in a leather portfolio, explaining that it was standard procedure for families of significant wealth to protect generational assets. Alfred had barely glanced at it before signing, sitting in that mahogany-paneled office, while Flores squeezed his hand and assured him it was just a formality that her parents insisted, but it didn't mean anything, because they'd be together forever. He'd been so in love, so sure that money didn't matter, that he'd never want anything from Flores except her heart. He'd signed away any claim to her family money, her trust fund, her inheritance. All he'd cared about was marrying her and starting their life together. "You want me to divorce him?" Flores said flatly. "I want you to consider your options before it's too late," Patricia corrected, her voice softer now, more manipulative. "Before you have children with him, before more years pass and the courts start looking at things differently. Your father's health isn't what it used to be, sweetheart. The doctors are saying maybe 2 years, possibly less. When he passes, you'll inherit your portion of the company, roughly a third of everything. Do you really want Alfred to have any legal claim to that? Do you want to spend your inheritance fighting him in divorce court 5 or 10 years from now when things finally fall apart?" There was a long silence. Alfred stood in the hallway, his hands shaking, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his chest and fall onto the polished hospital floor. "Say no," he thought desperately. "Tell her she's wrong. Tell her I'm not like that. Defend us. Defend what we built." "I don't know, Mom," Flores finally whispered. "I just don't know anymore." Those 5 words shattered something inside Alfred that he didn't know could break. He'd heard doubt in his wife's voice. Not anger at her mother's suggestion, not outrage at the insinuation that he was some kind of gold digger waiting to strike, just uncertainty. Like she'd been thinking the same things but hadn't said them out loud until now. Like Patricia had simply vocalized thoughts Flores had been having privately for months, maybe years. If you enjoy stories of shocking family betrayals, cold-blooded manipulation, and the devastating moment when you realize the people you love see you as nothing more than a liability, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new stories here every day, each one more intense than the last one you watched, and tell me where you're watching from. Alfred backed away from the door silently, his engineering mind automatically calculating his steps to avoid making noise on the linoleum floor. He made it to the elevator, then to his car in the parking garage, moving on autopilot like a robot whose programming had just been corrupted. He sat in his 2019 Honda Accord, the car Patricia had apparently found so embarrassingly modest, and stared at the steering wheel for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The flowers he'd bought sat on the passenger seat, already wilting in the stale car air. His phone buzzed. A text from Flores. "Where are you? I thought you were coming to visit Mom." He stared at the message for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then he typed back, "Sorry, got held up at work. Emergency project. Power system failure at the Riverside development. I'll come by tomorrow." It was the first time he'd ever lied to her, the first deliberate untruth in 6 years of marriage. The words felt foreign, wrong, but also necessary. He needed time to think, to process, to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do with this information. Alfred drove home to their three-bedroom house in Lincoln Park, the one Patricia thought was beneath her daughter, and walked through the door like a ghost haunting his own life. Everything looked different now, like he was seeing it all for the first time with new, cynical eyes. The furniture they'd picked out together at that boutique store on Armitage Avenue. The photos on the walls from their honeymoon in Greece, where they'd explored ancient ruins and made love on hotel balconies overlooking the Aegean Sea. The kitchen where they'd cooked dinner together countless times, laughing and drinking wine and talking about their future. It all felt like a stage set now. A pretty lie. A performance he'd been giving without realizing it was all theater. He thought about their relationship with new eyes, reviewing 6 years of marriage like an engineer examining a flawed design. How many times had Flores suggested he take a better position at her father's company, framing it as concern for his career advancement? How often had she seemed disappointed when he turned down her family's offers of financial help, saying things like, "Pride is expensive, Alfred," or "There's no shame in accepting support from family." How frequently had she compared their lifestyle to her friends' more lavish ones? The bigger homes, the European vacations, the luxury cars, the private club memberships. He thought she was just being practical, maybe a little spoiled by her upbringing, but ultimately accepting of their modest by her standards lifestyle. He'd never imagined she was keeping score, calculating whether he was worth the investment, measuring him against some invisible standard he'd never had a chance of meeting. Alfred opened his laptop and did something he'd never done before. He looked up the Whitmore family net worth, not because he wanted their money, but because he needed to understand the scope of what he was supposedly chasing, according to Patricia's narrative. What he found made his stomach turn with a queasy mixture of shock and anger. Patricia hadn't been exaggerating. Whitmore Enterprises was valued at approximately $47 million, according to a Chicago Business Journal article from last year, specializing in commercial construction and property development throughout the Midwest. The company had built half the office parks in the Chicago suburbs, developed luxury condominiums in Milwaukee and Indianapolis, and held significant real estate holdings across 3 states. Flores's trust fund, set up by her grandfather when she was born, was worth approximately $8 million according to public records. Her father, Richard Whitmore, age 62, had been diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer 18 months ago. According to the most recent article Alfred could find, Richard was still working but had begun succession planning. The company would be divided among his 3 children when he died: Flores and her 2 older brothers, Christopher and Matthew. Flores stood to inherit roughly $15 million in company stock and assets, plus partial ownership that would give her ongoing revenue from Whitmore Enterprises operations. And Alfred, according to the prenup he'd signed without reading carefully enough, without insisting on his own attorney review it, without protecting himself in any way, would get nothing. Not even the modest 3-bedroom home they lived in, which had been purchased with money from Flores's trust fund as a wedding gift from her parents. His name wasn't on the deed. He'd contributed his $25,000 toward the down payment, but legally the house belonged entirely to Flores. His contribution had been classified as a gift in the paperwork. He sat back in his desk chair, processing this information with the systematic mind of an engineer, breaking down a complex problem. 6 years of marriage, 6 years of believing they were partners, building a life together, making decisions as a team, and the whole time he'd been living in her world, on her terms, in her house, without even realizing it. He'd thought he was being independent by keeping his job, by refusing handouts. But he'd never noticed that he'd already accepted the biggest handout of all, a place to live that he could never actually own. His phone rang, Flores's photo lighting up the screen, a picture from their wedding day where she looked radiant and happy and like she genuinely loved him. He let it go to voicemail. She called again and again. On the 4th call, he finally answered. "Hey, where are you?" She sounded worried, or maybe annoyed. He couldn't tell anymore. Couldn't read her voice the way he thought he could. "You said you'd be here by 6. It's almost 8. Mom keeps asking about you." "I told you, work emergency," he said, keeping his voice neutral. Professional, like he was talking to a client instead of his wife. "The Riverside development has a major electrical issue. I need to review the plans and coordinate with the contractors tomorrow morning." Can't someone else handle it? Someone else. Like his job was optional. Like it didn't matter. Like he could just delegate his responsibilities because his mother-in-law wanted to see him. The same mother-in-law who just spent 20 minutes explaining to her daughter why he wasn't good enough. No, Flores, I'm the senior engineer on the project. This is my responsibility. Fine. Now she definitely sounded annoyed. How's your mom doing anyway? She's fine, stable. They're keeping her overnight for observation, but the doctors think it was just a minor episode. Nothing serious. Flores paused. Are you okay? You sound weird. Just tired. It's been a long day. The longest day of his life, actually. The day his marriage died, even though they were both still pretending it was alive. Well, can you come now? Mom's asking for you. She wants to apologize for being difficult lately. The audacity of it stunned him into silence for a moment. Patricia wanted to apologize? For what? Getting caught? Or was this part of the strategy? Smooth things over? Keep Alfred compliant and unsuspecting while they figured out the best way to extract Flores from the marriage with minimal financial damage? I can't tonight, Alfred said firmly. I really do have work to handle. Tell her I'll visit tomorrow afternoon. Alfred, what's going on? You're being strange. Nothing's going on. I'm just exhausted and stressed about this project. I'll see you when you get home, okay? He ended the call before she could press further, before she could hear the crack in his voice that would give away that something fundamental had shifted. Then he did something that would change everything. He pulled up his contacts and called his old college roommate, David Park, who happened to be a divorce attorney. They'd been close once, before Alfred got married and life got busy. David had been his best man at the wedding, had given a toast about how Alfred had finally found someone who appreciated his terrible jokes and his obsessive attention to detail. They'd drifted apart over the years, the way friends do when life takes them in different directions. But Alfred knew David was still practicing law in the loop. Alfred Jones, David answered warmly after 3 rings. It's been what? 2 years? 3? How's married life treating you? I need your help, Alfred said quietly. I need to know exactly what I signed when I got married. There was a pause. When David spoke again, his voice was completely different, serious, professional, alert. What happened? I overheard something today, something that made me realize I might not know my wife as well as I thought I did. Alfred took a deep breath. And I need to understand what kind of legal position I'm in, what I'm entitled to, what I'm not. Send me everything you have, David said without hesitation. The prenup, any financial agreements, property deeds, everything. I'll review it tonight and we'll meet first thing tomorrow morning. My office, 8 a.m. Can you do that? Yes. Thank you, David. Don't thank me yet, David said grimly. If what you're implying is what I think you're implying, we might have a lot of work to do. Alfred spent the next 3 hours digging through their home office, finding copies of every document he'd signed since he and Flores started dating. The prenup, the house deed that bore only her name, their joint bank account agreements, insurance policies, even the registration for his car, which turned out to also be technically in Flores's name because it had been a birthday gift from her parents 2 years ago. He scanned everything and emailed it all to David in one massive file dump. Then he waited, sitting in the dark living room of a house that wasn't his, wondering how his life had become so complicated. Flores came home around 11, looking tired but relieved, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Mom's going to be fine, she announced, dropping her designer purse, a Prada bag that cost more than Alfred made in a week, on the counter. The doctors think it was just a minor episode, probably stress-related. She should be discharged in a day or 2. That's good, Alfred said from the couch, not looking up from his phone where he was pretending to read work emails. She studied him for a moment, her head tilted in that way she did when she was trying to figure him out. You're being weird. What's wrong? And don't say nothing. I've been married to you for 6 years. I know when something's bothering you. Nothing's wrong. Just thinking about the Riverside project. On a Wednesday night at 11 p.m., she kicked off her heels and sat down beside him, close enough that he could smell her perfume. Chanel No. 5, her signature scent, another thing that cost more than seemed reasonable. Alfred, talk to me. What's really going on? He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since he'd heard that conversation. The woman he'd loved for 7 years, the woman he'd married, built a life with, imagined growing old with, and he wondered, had she ever really loved him? Or had he always been a disappointing investment that she'd convinced herself might pay off somehow? "Do you think I'm good enough for you?" he asked quietly. Flores blinked, clearly caught off guard by the question. "What? Of course you are. Where is this coming from? Just answer the question. Honestly, no deflection. Do you think I'm good enough for you?" She fidgeted with her wedding ring, a platinum band with a 1-carat diamond that she'd picked out and her parents had paid for over his objections, not meeting his eyes. "You're a good man, Alfred. You work hard. You're kind. You're smart. You're—" "That's not what I asked." His voice was steady, calm. Inside, he was breaking into 1,000 pieces. "Do you think I'm good enough for you? For your family? For the life you were supposed to have? Yes or no?" "Alfred, that's not a yes or no question. Because I heard something today," he continued, his voice still eerily calm. "Something that made me wonder if I've been living in a fantasy for the past 6 years. Something that made me question everything I thought I knew about us, about what we are to each other." Her face went pale, the color draining so fast she looked almost sick. "What did you hear?" He could have confronted her right there, could have told her he'd been standing outside her mother's hospital room, that he'd heard every single word of Patricia's calculated manipulation and Flores' weak, uncertain responses. But something stopped him, some instinct for self-preservation that he didn't know he possessed, some voice in his head that sounded like David saying, "Don't show your hand until you know what game you're playing." Instead, he said, "I heard myself, in my own head, asking questions I should have asked a long time ago. Questions about whether we're really equals in this marriage or if I've been kidding myself." Flores looked relieved, which told Alfred everything he needed to know. She'd been afraid he'd found out about the conversation, which meant there was something to find out, which meant she knew on some level that what her mother had said was wrong, but she'd participated anyway. "You're being paranoid," she said, standing up abruptly. "You're stressed about work and you're taking it out on us. I'm going to bed. We can talk about this when you're being rational." She walked upstairs, her footsteps heavy on the wooden stairs they'd had refinished last year with money from her trust fund, leaving Alfred alone with his thoughts and his phone, which buzzed a moment later with an email from David. "Alfred, I've reviewed your documents. This is worse than I thought. We need to talk ASAP. Call me first thing tomorrow. And Alfred, don't sign anything else. Don't agree to anything. Don't make any major decisions until we talk." Alfred read the message 3 times, his jaw clenching tighter with each pass. They had no idea what was coming. The Whitmores thought they were so smart, so strategic, moving their chess pieces around the board with practiced precision. They thought Alfred was just a simple engineer, too naive to understand their games, too in love to protect himself, too intimidated by their wealth and status to fight back. They were wrong. Over the next 2 weeks, Alfred Jones became someone he barely recognized. A man who planned 3 moves ahead, who documented everything, who smiled at his wife over breakfast while recording their conversations on his phone with a voice memo app. It felt like betrayal. It felt like survival. Mostly it felt like he'd woken up from a dream he hadn't known he was having, and reality was cold and sharp and unforgiving. David had laid out a strategy that was both simple and devastating during their 8 a.m. meeting the morning after Alfred had overheard the hospital room conversation. They'd met in David's office in the Loop, a modest space that felt honest compared to the Whitmore family attorney's mahogany-paneled intimidation chamber. "Don't let them know you know," David had advised, spreading Alfred's documents across his desk like evidence at a crime scene. "Right now they think you're clueless, that you're just the nice, naive engineer who loves their daughter and doesn't understand how wealth works. That's your advantage. Let them make their move first, let them show their full strategy, and when they do, we'll be ready to counter every single play." So Alfred played his part with an engineer's precision. He visited Patricia in the hospital the next day, bringing more flowers, pink roses this time, because Flores had mentioned once that her mother preferred them to the white ones he'd brought before. He sat by her bedside making small talk, while she pretended to be grateful for his concern, while she smiled that practiced smile that never quite reached her calculating eyes. "Alfred, dear," Patricia had said, reaching for his hand with surprising strength for someone who'd supposedly had a stroke. Her grip was firm, possessive. "I want to apologize for being so difficult these past few years. I know I haven't always been welcoming. I haven't always made you feel like part of the family." "It's okay," Alfred had replied, squeezing her hand gently while his phone recorded everything from his jacket pocket, the voice memo app running silently. "Family dynamics can be complicated. I understand." "They certainly can." She'd smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes, didn't touch the hardness there. "Flores is my only daughter, you understand. After 2 boys, she was my precious girl. I just want what's best for her, what she deserves." "So do I," he'd said, meaning it despite everything. "Of course you do. You're a good man, Alfred." Patricia had patted his hand in a gesture that might have seemed maternal to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. "That's why I'm sure you'll understand when certain changes need to be made for her benefit, for her future." The phrase hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning, heavy with implication. Alfred had just nodded, playing the role of the oblivious husband perfectly, letting her think he was too simple to catch the subtext. That evening, David had listened to the recording and whistled low, a sound of professional appreciation mixed with disgust. "She's setting the stage, establishing a narrative that any decisions being made are for Flores's own good, not motivated by greed or prejudice. Classic manipulation. She's building a story where she's the protective mother and you're the unfortunate obstacle to her daughter's happiness." "So what's my next move?" Alfred had asked. "We wait, and we gather evidence. Everything she says, every conversation, every suggestion, document it all. If this goes to court, we need to show a pattern of manipulation and bad faith." The evidence came faster than Alfred expected. 3 days. After Patricia was discharged from the hospital, Flores announced that her mother wanted them to come to dinner at the family estate in Lake Forest. The invitation had come via text during Alfred's lunch break. "Mom wants to have us over for dinner Saturday. Family thing, 7 p.m. Dress nice." "Just a small gathering," Flores had elaborated when he'd asked about it that evening. "Mom wants to apologize properly for being weird at the hospital, and Dad wants to see you. He's been asking about you, wondering why you haven't visited." Alfred had visited Richard Whitmore 3 times in the past 6 months, but apparently that wasn't enough. Or maybe Richard was asking for a different reason. Saturday arrived with typical Chicago October weather, cold, gray, threatening rain. Alfred wore his one good suit, the charcoal one he'd bought for their wedding and wore to client presentations. Flores wore a designer dress that probably cost more than his suit, her hair and makeup perfect, looking every inch the Whitmore daughter she'd been raised to be. The drive to Lake Forest took 45 minutes in light traffic. The Whitmore estate sat on 3 acres of prime lakefront property, a sprawling brick mansion that had been featured in Chicago Magazine's Most Beautiful Homes issue 2 years ago. Alfred had never felt comfortable there, in that house where every piece of furniture cost more than his annual salary, where the art on the walls was museum quality, where even the guest bathroom had marble imported from Italy. Richard Whitmore's illness had progressed significantly since Alfred had last seen him 6 months ago at an awkward Easter dinner. The man who'd built a commercial empire from a single construction crew looked frail now, his skin gray and papery, his hands shaking slightly as he shook Alfred's hand in the grand foyer. "Alfred," Richard said, his voice raspy from the cancer and the treatments that were losing their effectiveness. "Good to see you, son." The word son felt like a lie now, but Alfred smiled warmly, channeling every ounce of acting ability he possessed. "You too, Richard. How are you feeling?" "Like death warmed over," Richard joked weakly, the humor not quite masking the truth. "But the doctors say I've got a few good months left in me yet. Maybe see another Christmas if I'm lucky." Dinner was served in the Whitmore's formal dining room, a space Alfred had always found intimidating with its crystal chandelier that looked like it belonged in Versailles, its original Monet on the wall, its table that could seat 16. Tonight it was just the 4 of them, positioned like pieces on a chessboard. Patricia sat at one end of the long table, Richard at the other, with Alfred and Flores positioned on opposite sides. The meal was prepared by the family's private chef. Patricia's sister joined them for dinner, making small talk about Flores' work at the Westbrook Gallery, where she curated contemporary art exhibitions. Questions about Alfred's engineering projects delivered with just enough condescension to remind him he worked with his hands for a living. Discussion of Patricia's recovery and how wonderful the doctors at St. Mary's had been. But Alfred noticed the undercurrent, the way Patricia kept steering the conversation back to money, to the future, to planning and preparation, and being smart about one's legacy. Richard and I have been meeting with our estate attorneys, Patricia announced over the main course. Beef Wellington that probably cost more per serving than Alfred's weekly grocery budget. Getting everything in order. You understand, with his health situation, we need to be prepared. We need to make sure everything is protected. Of course, Alfred said, cutting his beef with precision, keeping his expression neutral. That's very responsible. It's important to have everything documented properly. We've been reviewing everything, Patricia continued, her voice taking on that lecturing tone she used when she wanted to sound authoritative. The company's succession plans, the trusts, the property holdings, the offshore accounts, making sure everyone's interests are protected, making sure the right people benefit from everything Richard has built. Everyone meaning the family, Richard added, his voice carrying a weight that hadn't been there before, like he was reading from a script Patricia had written. The Whitmore family, the blood relatives who understand what this legacy means. Alfred looked up from his plate, meeting Richard's gaze across the elaborate floral centerpiece. There was something there, an apology maybe, or a warning, or perhaps just acknowledgement of what was happening. Richard had never been unkind to Alfred personally, but he'd also never stood up to Patricia when she made her little digs about Alfred's background, his state school education, his working-class family, his general unsuitability for their daughter. Of course, Alfred repeated calmly. Family comes first. That's what I was raised to believe too. That's what we've always believed, Patricia said, setting down her fork with deliberate precision. Which is why we wanted to talk to you both tonight. About the future, about what's best for everyone involved, about opportunities. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel if you have not, because the ending of this story will blow your mind. And drop a comment below telling me what you think Alfred should do next. Flores shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fork scraping against her plate in a way that made Alfred's teeth ache. He noticed she hadn't touched much of her food, had barely taken 3 bites of the expensive beef. We've been thinking, Patricia continued, her voice taking on that reasonable, rational tone that Alfred now recognized as deeply dangerous, that perhaps it would be beneficial for Flores to take a more active role in Whitmore Enterprises. With Richard's health declining, we need family members who can step up. Real family members who understand the legacy we're building, people who have Whitmore blood in their veins. The implication was clear. Alfred wasn't real family, would never be real family, no matter how long he was married to Flores. Flores always been interested in the business, Alfred said carefully, playing his role. She used to talk about it when we first started dating. I think that's a great idea for her to be more involved. The thing is, Richard said, and now his voice was apologetic, regretful, like he was about to deliver bad news he wished he didn't have to share. The position we're considering for her would require significant time commitment, possibly relocation. The company's main operations are expanding to Austin, Texas. We're opening a new development division there. Luxury condos, mixed-use properties, a whole new market for us. Alfred felt the trap closing, the walls moving in. Austin? Wonderful city, Patricia said brightly, her enthusiasm practiced and polished. Great opportunities, incredible growth market, and the position would come with a substantial compensation package. Vice President of Development, $250,000 a year to start, plus equity in the new division, plus bonuses tied to project completions. She could easily make $350,000 in her first year. Flores was staring at her plate, her face carefully neutral, her fingers gripping her fork too tightly. That's an amazing opportunity, Alfred said, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest like pressure in a faulty system. When would this start? What's the timeline? As soon as possible, Richard said, coughing slightly. The division launches in March, first quarter of next year. That gives us about 6 weeks to get everything in place, to get Flores relocated, set up, oriented with the team we're building down there. 6 weeks. They wanted Flores in Austin in 6 weeks, 1,500 miles away from Chicago, away from Alfred, away from their home, their friends, their life together, where she could file for divorce in Texas under different laws, different circumstances, different jurisdictions that might be more favorable to the Whitmores. And Alfred, Patricia said, her smile sharp as broken glass, we certainly understand that this would be difficult for you. Your career is here in Chicago, Morrison Technical, right? Your job, your colleagues, your projects. We wouldn't expect you to uproot your entire life and career. That wouldn't be fair to you. There it was, the play laid out on the table as clearly as the fine china and crystal glasses. Flores moves to Austin for this incredible opportunity, this vice presidency that any 32-year-old would kill for. Alfred stays in Chicago because of his pedestrian engineering job that he couldn't possibly give up, that wouldn't transfer, that tied him to the city. They live apart for a few months, maybe a year. The distance strains the marriage naturally. No one's the bad guy. It's just circumstances, just career opportunities, just life pulling them in different directions. Eventually, Flores files for divorce in Texas, where the prenup might be viewed more favorably to the Whitmores, where Alfred would have no support system, no local attorney who knew the family's tricks, no resources to fight back effectively. It was brilliant, utterly brilliant, and it would have worked perfectly if Alfred hadn't been standing outside that hospital room 2 weeks ago, if he hadn't heard Patricia's calculations and Flores's doubts. Well, Alfred said slowly, deliberately, choosing each word with care, I appreciate you thinking of Flores's career. This is obviously a huge opportunity for her, something she needs to consider carefully, something we need to discuss as a couple. Of course, Patricia agreed smoothly. Take all the time you need. But Richard and I do need an answer by the end of next week, Friday at the latest. The position can't wait indefinitely. We have other candidates we're considering if Flores isn't interested. The implied threat was clear. Take it or lose it. Decide quickly before you have time to think too carefully, before you can consult with anyone who might point out how suspicious this all is. They finished dinner with dessert, some elaborate French pastry that Alfred couldn't pronounce, and coffee served in cups so delicate he was afraid he'd break them. The conversation shifted to safer topics, Flores' brothers and their families, Patricia's charity work, plans for Thanksgiving. All of it felt like glass in Alfred's mouth, sharp and cutting and likely to draw blood. When he and Flores finally left, driving home in silence through the dark Chicago streets, Alfred felt his wife's anxiety radiating like heat from a furnace. You're angry, Flores said finally when they were halfway home, stopped at a red light on Lakeshore Drive. I'm processing. It's a good opportunity. It's a great opportunity, Alfred agreed, his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. Vice president at 32, $250,000 salary, equity in a new division. Most people would kill for that kind of position. But Austin is 1,500 miles away, Flores. 1,500 miles. And somehow, I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think this is just about your career. She was quiet for a long moment, so long that Alfred glanced over to see if she'd fallen asleep. But she was just staring out the window at the dark lake beyond the outer drive. When she spoke, her voice was small, uncertain. What do you want me to say? I want you to tell me the truth. Alfred kept his eyes on the road, navigating the familiar streets of their neighborhood. Are you planning to leave me? Is this whole Austin thing just a way to make it easier? No! But the denial came too fast, too defensive, too practiced. Alfred, that's crazy. I'm not. This is just about work, about my career, about finally doing something meaningful instead of just curating art shows for rich people who don't really care about the pieces. Is it? He pulled into their driveway, put the car in park, and finally looked at her directly. Really looked at her in the dim light from the street lamp. Because it feels like your parents are orchestrating something, and it feels like you're letting them. It feels like this is all part of some bigger plan that I'm not privy to. Flores's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment Alfred felt his resolve weaken. This was still his wife, the woman he'd loved for 7 years, the woman who cried at sad movies and laughed at his terrible jokes and fit perfectly against his chest when they slow danced in their kitchen. "You don't understand what it's like," she said, her voice breaking. "The pressure, the expectations. Being a Whitmore, I'm their only daughter, Alfred. When Dad dies, I'm supposed to carry on the legacy. I'm supposed to make him proud. I'm supposed to—" "Supposed to what?" Alfred interrupted, his own frustration finally breaking through. "Marry someone from your tax bracket? Have the right kind of children? Live the right kind of life in the right kind of neighborhood? Is that what this has always been about? Have I been a disappointment from day one? That's not fair, isn't it?" He got out of the car and she followed him into the house, into the space they'd made together, that felt less like home with every passing minute. "Your mother had a very interesting conversation with you in that hospital room, Flores. A conversation I happened to overhear." She froze in the hallway, her keys still in her hand, her face going pale even in the dim light. "What?" "I was there, outside the door." Alfred watched her face carefully, cataloging every micro-expression. "I heard everything. I heard her call me pedestrian. I heard her say I'm not good enough for you, that you married down, that I'm just waiting to get my hands on your inheritance. I heard her suggest you divorce me before your father dies and things get complicated. And you know what I didn't hear? I didn't hear you defend me. Not really, not with conviction. I heard you say you didn't know anymore." Flores sank onto the couch like her strings had been cut, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "Alfred, I didn't mean—" "6 years," he said quietly, standing over her, watching her crumble. "We've been married for 6 years, Flores, and I thought we were partners. I thought we were building something together, something real and lasting and worth fighting for. But I was building a marriage, and you were just— what? Slumming it? Seeing how the other half lives? Trying to rebel against your parents before eventually coming back to their world? That's not true." She looked up, tears streaming down her face, mascara running. "I love you. I do. I really do." "But do you respect me?" Alfred asked, the question he'd been avoiding for 2 weeks. "Do you see me as an equal? Or am I just the guy who wasn't quite good enough but you settled for anyway because I was nice and safe and made you feel like you weren't just another rich girl? I never said that. I never thought that. You didn't have to say it." He sat down across from her, exhausted, drained. "The Austin job. Tell me honestly, no more games. Is this about your career, or is this about creating distance so it's easier to end things? Is this about professional growth, or is this about giving your family what they want?" Flores was silent for a long time, her breathing evening out, her tears slowing. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, honest in a way she hadn't been in months. "My mom thinks we made a mistake. Getting married so young, from such different backgrounds. She thinks if Dad dies while we're still together, it's going to create legal complications with the inheritance, problems with the estate, issues with the company succession." "And what do you think?" Alfred asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. "I think I'm confused." She wiped her eyes, smearing her mascara even more. "I think I love you, but I also think maybe my mom has a point. We are from different worlds, Alfred. We always have been. And maybe that worked when we were young and everything was new and exciting, when playing house in Lincoln Park felt like an adventure. But now, I don't know. I look at my friends, at the lives they're living, the houses they own, the schools their kids go to, and sometimes I wonder if we're just delaying the inevitable." The honesty hurt more than Alfred had expected, like a knife slipping between his ribs with surgical precision. At least she was finally telling the truth. At least they were past the pretense. "So the Austin job," he said flatly, "is a real opportunity, a genuine position that my dad created because he thinks I have talent, because he wants me involved in the business." She met his eyes. "But yes, my mom suggested it as a way to create some space, to let us both figure out what we really want without the daily pressure of pretending everything's fine when it's not, while conveniently positioning you in a different state where you can file for divorce under different laws, where I'd have no home court advantage. Floris's silence was answer enough. She didn't deny it, couldn't deny it because it was obviously true. Alfred stood up, his decision made. I need to think. I'm going to stay at a hotel tonight, maybe a few nights. Alfred, please. I'm not angry, he said, and realized it was true. He was hurt, devastated, betrayed, but not angry. Anger would come later, maybe. Right now, he just felt hollow. I just need space to figure out my next move, to decide what I want from all of this. He packed a bag while Floris sat on the couch crying, her designer dress wrinkled, her perfect hair messy, looking more human than she had. In months, he kissed the top of her head on his way out, a gesture that felt more like goodbye than goodnight, and drove to the Hampton Inn near his office, a place that charged by the night and didn't ask questions. At the hotel, sitting on the generic bed in the generic room, Alfred pulled out his phone and called David Park. They made their move, Alfred said without preamble. Texas job offer, vice president of development, $250,000 a year, starts in 6 weeks, relocation required. David whistled, a sound Alfred was getting used to hearing. They're not subtle, are they? Just laying it all out there? What do I do? First, you get everything you can in writing. Emails about the job offer, the timeline, the compensation, the relocation requirements. Second, you start documenting your contributions to the marriage. Every bill you've paid, every improvement you've made to the house, every joint decision, every financial sacrifice. Third, David paused and Alfred could hear him thinking. Third, you decide if you're willing to fight. Really fight. Because this is going to get ugly, Alfred. These people have money and lawyers, and they're not going to let go of their daughter's inheritance without a war. I'm willing to fight, Alfred said, the words coming out stronger than he felt. I just need to know what I'm fighting for. Here's what I'm thinking, David said, and Alfred could hear papers rustling in the background. That prenup is vulnerable, very vulnerable. You had no independent counsel when you signed it. That's a major red flag that courts don't like. They didn't fully disclose Floris's complete assets. That's another problem. And the language around children creates ambiguity that we can exploit. If Floris files for divorce, we can challenge the entire agreement. But more importantly, if they're moving her to Texas specifically to create grounds for divorce, that's strong evidence of bad faith. Evidence that they're manipulating the situation to gain advantage. Can we use that? In court? Absolutely. But Alfred, court is ugly, expensive, public, very public. Your name will be in legal documents. Reporters might pick up the story. Wealthy family divorcing engineer. It's got tabloid appeal. Are you prepared for that? Can you afford it? Alfred thought about his savings account, about $60,000 accumulated over years of being careful with money. He thought about the past 2 weeks, about lies and manipulations and feeling like a fool in his own marriage. He thought about 6 years of building a life with someone who'd apparently been keeping one foot out the door the whole time. I'm prepared, he said firmly, and I'll find a way to afford it. Over the next 3 days, Alfred became meticulous in a way that would have impressed his engineering professors. He forwarded himself every email related to the Austin job offer, creating a digital paper trail. He documented his financial contributions to their joint accounts, over $380,000 in 6 years, including half the down payment on their house that he'd thought was joint but wasn't, renovations he'd paid for out of pocket, furniture purchases, utility bills, and countless expenses that had seemed shared but legally weren't. He took photos of every improvement he'd made to the house, the deck he'd built by hand one summer, the kitchen backsplash he'd installed tile by tile, the garden he'd planted and maintained for 5 years. He also started looking into Whitmore Enterprises more deeply, using his engineer's research skills and his access to public records. What he found was fascinating and troubling. The company had taken out significant loans in the past 2 years, unusual for such a supposedly profitable business. There were permits filed for developments that had been abandoned mid-construction, contracts that had fallen through, investors who'd pulled out of projects, leaving Whitmore Enterprises holding the debt. The Whitmore fortune wasn't quite as stable as they pretended. In fact, it might not be much of a fortune at all anymore. On Thursday, Flores called him for the third time that day. "Can we talk? Please? Face to face?" They met at a coffee shop near their house, neutral territory, a chain place with generic furniture and overpriced lattes. Flores looked exhausted, her usual polish completely absent. No makeup, hair in a messy ponytail, wearing jeans and a Northwestern sweatshirt instead of her usual designer outfits. She looked young and vulnerable, and more like the girl he'd fallen in love with 7 years ago. "I've been thinking," she said, stirring her latte absently, not drinking it, "about everything. About us. About what you said. And I don't want to lose you." She looked up, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "I know I've been terrible. I know I let my mom get in my head, let her make me doubt what we have. But Alfred, I do love you. I really do. That was never a lie. But," because there was always a but. There had to be. "But I'm also being offered an incredible opportunity, a real opportunity that could change my career, that could give me purpose beyond just managing other people's art. And I don't want to have to choose between my career and my marriage. I don't want those to be mutually exclusive things. That's not what this is about, Flores. You know that. This is about your family orchestrating our separation, using your career as an excuse to put 1,500 miles between us." "Maybe," she admitted, playing with her wedding ring, twisting it around her finger. "Probably. My mom is definitely manipulating the situation. But what if I took the job anyway? What if we made it work despite their intentions? Long distance for a while, until you could find something in Austin. You're a talented engineer. You could get a job anywhere." Alfred studied her across the small table. She seemed sincere, her eyes earnest, her voice hopeful. But he'd thought she was sincere 6 years ago when she'd promised to love him forever, and look where that got him. "Did your mom tell you to say this?" he asked quietly. Flores flinched like he'd slapped her. "No, this is me. Just me. This is what I want." "Okay." Alfred leaned back in his chair. "Then answer me honestly. If I said no, if I told you that taking this job would end our marriage, that I couldn't do long distance, that I needed you to choose between Austin and us, what would you pick?" She opened her mouth immediately, then closed it. Opened it again. Closed it again. The silence stretched between them, heavy and damning. I don't know. I honestly don't know, Alfred." And there it was, the truth. After 6 years of marriage, faced with choosing between Alfred and a job her mother had engineered specifically to separate them, Flores didn't know what she would choose. "I need to tell you something," Alfred said, his voice steady. "I've hired a lawyer." Flores went very still, her latte forgotten, her face pale. "What?" "I've hired a divorce attorney, David Park. You remember him, my college roommate, to review our prenup and advise me on my options, to protect my interests." "Alfred, you can't be serious. We're not getting divorced. This is just a rough patch. Aren't we?" He kept his voice gentle, not accusatory. "Flores, your family has made it very clear that I'm not welcome in their world, that I'm not good enough, that I never was, that I never will be. And you've spent the last 2 weeks proving them right by refusing to stand up to them, by considering this job that we both know is designed to end our marriage. So yes, I hired a lawyer to protect myself from getting completely destroyed." "From me?" She sounded genuinely hurt. "From a situation where everyone else has attorneys and strategies and plans, and I'm the only one operating on good faith like an idiot." Alfred reached across the table and took her hand, felt her fingers cold and trembling. "I love you. I probably always will. But I'm not going to be the fool who gets crushed because he was too in love to see what was happening. I'm not going to walk away from 6 years of marriage with nothing while your family congratulates themselves on protecting their precious assets." Flores pulled her hand back like his touch burned. "So what happens now?" "Now you decide what you want," Alfred said, standing up, leaving his own coffee untouched. "The Austin job or this marriage. Your mother's approval and your father's legacy, or building a real life with me based on honesty and equality. You can't have both, Flores. Not anymore. Those days are over." "That's not fair. That's not a fair choice." Life isn't fair, Alfred said, echoing words his father had told him 1,000 times growing up. But I'm done pretending I don't see what's happening. You have until Monday to decide. That's 3 days. Take the job, and I'll file for divorce immediately. Turn it down, and we go. To counseling and work on this marriage for real. But no more games. No more manipulation. No more letting your mother pull the strings like you're her puppet. He left her sitting there at the coffee shop table, knowing he'd just forced the biggest decision of their marriage. But they'd been heading toward this moment since the day he'd stood outside that hospital room. Maybe since the day they'd gotten married, two people from different worlds who'd convinced themselves love could bridge every gap. His phone rang as he drove back to the hotel. David. Alfred, get to my office right now, David said, his voice urgent and excited in a way Alfred had never heard before. I found something. Something big. Something that changes everything. David Park's office was unusually crowded when Alfred arrived 20 minutes later, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. Besides David, there were two other people Alfred didn't recognize. A middle-aged woman in a sharp business suit who looked like she ate corporate corruption for breakfast, and a younger man with wire-rimmed glasses who was already typing furiously on a laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard like he was composing a symphony. Alfred, this is Jennifer Walsh, forensic accountant. David introduced them quickly, gesturing to the woman who stood to shake Alfred's hand with a grip that could crack walnuts. And this is Tom Jones, no relation to you, financial investigator specializing in corporate fraud. Sit down. Trust me, you're going to want to sit down for this. Alfred sat in one of David's client chairs, his palms sweating despite the air conditioning. What did you find? Jennifer opened a folder so thick it looked like it could be used as a weapon, spreading several pages across the conference table with the precision of someone laying out evidence at trial. Numbers, charts, bank statements, documents with Whitmore Enterprises letterhead. Your father-in-law's company, Whitmore Enterprises, Jennifer began, her voice crisp and professional. We started digging after you mentioned they seemed unusually concerned about protecting assets. What we found is, well, it's not good for them. Actually, it's catastrophic. She spread several pages across the conference table like she was dealing cards in the world's most expensive poker game. Numbers, charts, financial statements that made Alfred's engineering-trained eyes swim. Whitmore Enterprises has been hemorrhaging money for the past 3 years, Jennifer continued, pointing to a chart that showed a dramatic downward trajectory. Richard Whitmore made some aggressive expansion decisions right before his cancer diagnosis. He bought properties in Miami and Denver, started development projects in Nashville and Milwaukee that required significant capital investment. Then he got sick and everything started falling apart. Projects stalled, investors got nervous, partnerships dissolved. Tom jumped in, his fingers still flying across his laptop keyboard, pulling up spreadsheets that made Alfred's head spin. The company took out loans totaling $12 million to finance these expansions. $12 million. They've been servicing that debt by quietly liquidating other assets, selling off properties, cashing in investments, drawing down credit lines. But they're running out of things to sell. They're circling the drain. How bad is it? Alfred asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. As of last month? Jennifer met his eyes, and there was something like sympathy there, mixed with professional satisfaction. The company is approximately $6 million in debt when you account for liabilities versus liquid assets. That $47 million valuation Patricia loves to throw around? It's based entirely on real estate holdings that they can't sell without tanking their ongoing operations. It's smoke and mirrors. It's a house of cards, and it's about 3 months from complete collapse. Alfred felt dizzy, like the room was tilting. So Flores' inheritance is not what her parents told her it is, David finished, leaning back in his chair. Or more accurately, not what it will be if they keep bleeding money at this rate. In 2 years, maybe less, Whitmore Enterprises could be completely insolvent. Flores won't be inheriting millions. She'll be inheriting debt, massive debt, legal liability, potentially even personal liability if the bankruptcy court decides to pierce the corporate veil. Which explains everything, Alfred said slowly, his engineer's mind clicking pieces into place. Patricia's urgency, the prenup, the Austin job. They're not protecting a fortune. They're protecting themselves from a financial apocalypse. They're trying to make sure that when everything collapses, Flores isn't dragged down with the ship. And they definitely don't want me anywhere near the wreckage. Exactly, David nodded, looking pleased that Alfred was catching on so quickly. And here's where it gets interesting for you. That prenup you signed, it specifically specifies that you have no claim to Flores's inheritance from her family estate or family business entities. But if the estate is actually underwater, if Flores stands to inherit liabilities rather than assets, the prenup's protections become meaningless. You can't be kept from claiming something that doesn't exist. The whole foundation of that agreement is built on the assumption of wealth that isn't there anymore. But what about Flores's trust fund? Alfred asked, remembering the $8 million figure he'd seen in his research. That's separate from the company, right? That's real money? Jennifer smiled grimly, the expression of someone about to deliver a killing blow. That's the other piece of good news for you. Trust funds in Illinois are considered separate property in a divorce, unless they've been commingled with marital assets in significant ways. And guess what we found when we subpoenaed the trust records? You subpoenaed her trust? Alfred asked, shocked. We made some calls, requested some documents, used some connections, David said vaguely. The point is, Flores's trust has been paying for your mortgage, your property taxes, your home renovations, your car insurance, basically your entire life together, for 6 years. Every time money came out of that trust and went into your joint life, it became marital property under Illinois law. The trust isn't separate anymore. It's been thoroughly mixed with your marriage. Alfred sat back in his chair, trying to process this information. So the prenup is effectively worthless, David confirmed. Unable to hide his satisfaction, they designed it to protect assets that either don't exist anymore or have been so thoroughly mixed with your marital assets that they can't be legally separated. A decent lawyer, and I'm a very good lawyer, could shred this document in court. We could argue that you signed it under duress, without independent counsel, without full financial disclosure, and that the fundamental premise of the agreement has been materially altered by the commingling of assets. But there's more, Tom said, pulling up something new on his laptop screen, turning it so Alfred could see. Richard Whitmore made Flores a signatory on several company accounts 3 years ago. Probably for estate planning purposes, or maybe to make the succession look more official. But that means she's legally liable for company debts if the business fails. If Whitmore Enterprises goes bankrupt, and it will, Flores could be personally on the hook for millions of dollars in unpaid obligations. Contractor payments, loan guarantees, investor commitments. Alfred's mind raced, connecting dots, seeing the full picture finally. So Patricia isn't trying to protect Flores's inheritance. She's trying to protect Flores from inheriting a financial catastrophe that could destroy her life. And she's trying to make sure I'm not around to have any legal claim or liability when it all falls apart, while simultaneously ensuring you're not positioned to make any claims against what little remains of the estate. Yes, David agreed. If they can get Flores divorced before Richard dies, your name is nowhere near any of this mess. You can't make claims against the trust fund. You can't be held liable for company debts. You're just gone. Clean break. But if you're still married when Richard passes and the company collapses, I become a creditor's target too, Alfred finished, the full horror of it sinking in. Because marital assets can be pursued to satisfy business debts. They could come after everything we own together, everything I've built, to pay Whitmore Enterprises obligations. Exactly right, Jennifer confirmed. You're smarter than they gave you credit for. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you would have done in Alfred's situation. Alfred stood up, pacing the small conference room, his mind working through scenarios and possibilities. Everything made terrible, perfect sense now. Patricia's hostility wasn't about class prejudice, though that was part of it. It was about protecting her daughter from a business failure that could ruin Flores's life. The rushed timeline, the Austin job designed to separate them quickly, the prenup she'd insisted on. It wasn't about keeping Alfred away from wealth. It was about keeping Alfred from being collateral damage when the Whitmore empire imploded. In a twisted way, Patricia was actually trying to protect him too. By getting him divorced and out of the family before the collapse, she was ensuring he wouldn't be dragged into bankruptcy alongside them. "What are my options?" Alfred asked, stopping his pacing to face David directly. David ticked them off on his fingers, lawyer style. 1. File for divorce now. Challenge the prenup aggressively. Fight for an equitable distribution of marital assets before everything implodes. You could potentially get half of what's in that trust fund. $4 million, give or take. 2. Stay married. Hope Whitmore Enterprises somehow recovers against all odds, potentially get dragged into their financial mess, and lose everything you've worked for. 3. Negotiate. Negotiate what? Leverage. David's smile was sharp, predatory, the smile of an attorney who just found the perfect pressure point. You know something they don't think you know. You know their empire is crumbling. You know Flores is being positioned to inherit a disaster. You know their prenup is toilet paper. That's power, Alfred. Real power. The question is, what do you want to do with it? Alfred thought about Flores crying in that coffee shop just hours ago. About 6 years of marriage that had been built on shifting sand, on assumptions that turned out to be false. About loving someone who'd never quite believed he was good enough but had married him anyway. About being manipulated and underestimated and treated like a problem to be managed. "I want the truth to come out," Alfred said finally, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. "I want Flores to know what her parents are really protecting her from, what they've been hiding from her. And I want—" He paused, shocked by what he was about to say. "I want her to have a choice, a real choice, based on actual information, not lies and manipulation." David raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "You want to help her? After everything they've done to you? After they've spent 6 years treating you like you're not good enough to breathe their air? I want to give her what her parents never did. Respect. Trust. The complete truth, even when it's ugly." Alfred sat back down, his decision crystallizing. "Can we do that? Can we show her everything without it being some kind of legal violation?" "We can," David said slowly, thoughtfully. "But Alfred, you understand that if you help Flores see what's really happening, she might use that information to protect herself in ways that don't include you. She might cut ties completely. She might take our research and hire her own attorneys and leave you with nothing. You might end up being the guy who handed his wife the tools to destroy him. Is that a risk you're willing to take?" "I'd rather have nothing honestly than something built on lies," Alfred said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Over the next 48 hours, David's team compiled a comprehensive report that looked like something the SEC would produce. Financial analysis of Whitmore Enterprises' deteriorating position, projections showing the company's likely bankruptcy within 18 months, documentation of Flores' legal liability as a company signatory. Alfred added his own evidence, recordings of Patricia's hospital room conversation, emails about the Austin job with their suspicious timing, proof of Flores' trust fund being thoroughly commingled with marital assets. Everything organized in a professional binder, everything documented, everything undeniable. On Sunday evening, one day before Flores' supposed deadline to accept or decline the Austin position, Alfred called his wife. "Can you come to David Park's office tomorrow morning?" he asked without preamble. 10 a.m. There's something you need to see, something important." "Alfred, I don't think meeting with lawyers is going to help us work things out. It's not about divorce," he interrupted. "It's about your family, about what they're not telling you. Please, Flores, just trust me one more time. After tomorrow, you can make whatever decision you want about Austin, about us, about everything. But you need to see this first." She was quiet for a moment, and he could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "Okay, I'll be there. 10 o'clock. Monday morning arrived cold and gray, typical December in Chicago. Flores showed up at David's office at 9:58, punctual as always, looking nervous and defiant in equal measure. She wore a designer suit, Armani probably, her armor against whatever she expected to face. Her expression shifted from defensive to confused when she saw not just Alfred and David, but Jennifer and Tom as well, all of them waiting for her, like this was some kind of intervention. "What is this?" she asked, stopping in the doorway. "Alfred, what's going on?" "Sit down," Alfred said gently, gesturing to an empty chair. "Please, this is important." She sat slowly, her designer handbag clutched in her lap like a shield. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Alfred slid the thick folder across the table to her, and she stared at it like it might explode. "Before you open that," Alfred said carefully, "I want you to know something. I love you. I have always loved you, even when loving you hurt. And what I'm about to show you isn't revenge. It's not a manipulation, or a trick or some legal strategy to hurt you. It's the truth. The truth I think you deserve to know before you make any major decisions about your future. About Austin, about us, about your family's business." Flores opened the folder with trembling hands. Her face went pale as she read the first page. The financial analysis of Whitmore Enterprises, showing mounting debt and declining assets. Her hands shook as she flipped through page after page. Debt schedules showing $12 million in loans, asset liquidation records, projected insolvency timelines, contractor liens, investor lawsuits pending. "This can't be right," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The company is worth $47 million. My dad said, my mom always talks about on paper based on real estate valuations," Jennifer said quietly, not unkindly. "In reality, the company is drowning in debt your father took on to finance expansion projects that failed. Your mother has been quietly selling assets to keep the company afloat and maintain appearances, all while telling you that you're protecting a fortune that doesn't exist anymore." Flores looked at Alfred, her eyes wide with shock and something that looked like betrayal. "You investigated my family? You hired forensic accountants to dig into my father's business?" "I protected myself," Alfred corrected calmly, refusing to feel guilty. "After I heard your mother tell you I wasn't good enough, that I was calculating and manipulative, that you should divorce me before your father dies to avoid complications. I hired a lawyer to review the prenup I'd signed without really understanding what I was signing. And in the process of protecting myself, we found this. We found the truth about what's really happening." He slid another document across the table. Flores's trust fund statement, marked with Jennifer's notes showing every instance where trust money had paid for their shared life. "Your trust fund has been paying for our life together for 6 years, Alfred explained, watching her face as she processed the information. "The mortgage, the renovations, the car insurance, the property taxes, everything. Under Illinois law, that makes it marital property, not separate property. The prenup your parents had me sign to protect your assets? It's worthless. Not because of any trick on my part, but because they mixed your separate money with our marriage so thoroughly that it can't be untangled. So you could take my money," Flores said, her voice hollow and distant. "That's what this is about. You're going to divorce me and take half of everything?" "I could," Alfred agreed, not sugarcoating it, "if I wanted to, if I was the person your mother thinks I am. But that's not why I'm showing you this. That's not what this meeting is about." He pulled out the final document, the analysis of Flores's legal liability as a signatory on company accounts, complete with projections of her personal exposure if Whitmore Enterprises declared bankruptcy. "This is why your mother really wants you divorced before your father dies," Alfred said, watching comprehension dawn on her face. "Not to protect your inheritance from me, to protect you from inheriting catastrophic debt. If Whitmore Enterprises collapses while you're a signatory on company accounts, and while you're married to me, both of us could be held personally liable for company obligations, millions of dollars in debt. Your mother isn't trying to keep me from stealing your fortune, Flores. She's trying to make sure I can't drag you down when everything falls apart. And she's trying to make sure you're not financially destroyed when your father's business empire crumbles." Flores stared at the documents spread before her, tears streaming down her face, her perfect makeup ruined. "They lied to me about everything, about the company, about the inheritance, about... Why didn't they just tell me the truth?" "They were trying to protect you," Alfred said, and was surprised to find himself actually defending her parents despite everything they'd done to him. "In their own dysfunctional, controlling way. They just didn't respect you enough to give you the truth. They treated you like a child who needed to be managed instead of an adult who could make her own informed decisions. And you did? She looked up at him, her face a mess of confusion and pain, and something that might have been gratitude or might have been anger. He honestly couldn't tell. You're giving me the truth? I'm giving it to you now because you deserve to make decisions based on reality, not manipulation. The Austin job? It's probably a legitimate opportunity. Your father does think you're talented, but you should take it because you want it, because it's right for your career, not because your mother is orchestrating our divorce and using your job as the excuse. What do you want, Alfred? Flores asked, her voice breaking completely. From all of this? From me? What's your angle? Alfred had thought about this question for 2 weeks straight, lying awake in hotel rooms, sitting in David's office, driving around Chicago at night unable to sleep. He'd imagined confronting Flores with evidence, demanding his fair share, fighting in court, proving that the poor immigrant's son was smarter than the wealthy family had ever given him credit for. But sitting across from his wife now, seeing her world crumble as she realized everything she believed was built on lies, he found he wanted something simpler and infinitely more complicated. I want you to have agency, he said simply. Real agency. To make your own choices about your life without your parents pulling strings or me manipulating you or anyone treating you like you can't handle reality. If you want the Austin job, take it. If you want to help save your family's company, even knowing how bad things are, do it. If you want to divorce me because you genuinely think we're not right for each other, I'll respect that and we'll work out a fair settlement. But don't do any of it because your mother made you feel like you have to. Don't do it because of money that doesn't exist or inheritance that's actually debt or some image of what your life is supposed to look like. And what about you? What do you get out of giving me this information? My self-respect, Alfred said, the answer coming easily. The knowledge that I was honest when everyone else was playing games. That I treated you like an equal capable of making informed decisions, even when your own family wouldn't. And maybe, if we're very lucky, and we both want it, a chance to rebuild our marriage on an actual foundation of truth instead of the illusion we've been living in. Flores was quiet for a long time, staring at the documents spread before her like pieces of a puzzle that finally made sense. Financial statements showing her family's decline, trust fund records showing years of commingling, legal analyses showing her personal liability, the complete, unvarnished truth. Finally, she looked up at David with an expression Alfred had never seen before. Pure determination mixed with barely controlled rage. Is all of this admissible in court? If I wanted to challenge my parents' control of the company? If I wanted to protect myself legally? David nodded seriously. It's public record mostly. Tax filings, loan documents, corporate records. Anyone could find it if they knew where to look and had the resources to compile it properly. But they've been hiding it from me, lying to me about the company's health while making me legally liable for its debts without my informed consent. Flores's voice was getting stronger, more focused. Is that legal? Can they do that? That's a question for a different kind of attorney, David said carefully. A business litigation specialist or someone who handles corporate malfeasance. But I know some excellent lawyers in that field if you're interested in having consultations. Flores looked at Alfred, really looked at him, maybe for the first time in months. You really didn't have to tell me any of this. You could have used it all against me. Destroyed me in divorce court, taken half my trust fund and walked away clean while my family fell apart. Yes, I could have, Alfred agreed, but that's not who I am. And more importantly, that's not who I want to be. I'd rather be honest and broke than wealthy and a liar. I've been awful to you, Flores whispered, tears flowing freely now. I let them make me doubt you, doubt us, doubt everything we built together. I'm so sorry, Alfred. I'm so incredibly sorry. I know you are. She reached across the table and took both his hands in hers, holding tight like she was afraid he might disappear. The Austin job. I'm going to turn it down. Flores, you don't have to. Not because of you, she interrupted firmly. Not because of them. Not because I'm scared or trying to save our marriage or anything like that. I'm turning it down because I'm done letting other people make my decisions. I'm going to talk to my father. Really talk to him about the company, about the debt, about all of it. I'm going to hire my own attorney to remove me as a signatory from those accounts and protect myself legally from the bankruptcy. And then I'm going to decide what I actually want to do with my life, on my own terms, for the first time ever. Alfred felt something shift in his chest, something that had been tight and painful for weeks finally loosening. This was the woman he'd married, strong, independent, capable of making hard decisions. She'd been buried under her parents' expectations and manipulations for so long that he'd almost forgotten she existed. But she was still there. "What about us?" he asked quietly, afraid of the answer, but needing to know. "I don't know yet," Flora said honestly, and somehow that honesty was better than false promises. "I need time to process all of this, to figure out who I am without my parents' voices in my head, without their money and their expectations and their lies, to understand what I really want from life, from marriage, from everything. Is that okay? Can you give me that time?" "It's okay," Alfred said, meaning it. "Take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere." They left David's office together but drove separately, both needing space to think. Alfred went back to his hotel room and sat on the bed, feeling strange and unmoored. He'd played his hand, shown Flores everything, given her the power to either destroy him or work with him. And now all he could do was wait. 3 days later, Flores called him. "Can you come to the house? Our house? I want to talk." Alfred found her in their kitchen, surrounded by documents, printouts of the financial analysis, legal pads covered with notes, highlighted sections, and circled numbers. She'd clearly been working through everything methodically, asking questions, making plans. "I confronted my father," she said without preamble, looking up from the papers. "Yesterday, showed him everything you gave me. Do you know what he said?" "What?" "Thank God someone finally told you the truth." Flores laughed, but it was bitter, painful. "He didn't even try to deny it, just said my mother had insisted on keeping me in the dark to protect me. Like I'm a child who can't handle reality. Like I'm too stupid or fragile to know that the family business is falling apart." "What did your mother say?" "I haven't talked to her yet. I'm not ready to face her without saying things I might regret." Flores poured them both coffee, the familiar domestic gesture making Alfred's heart ache. "But I talked to a business attorney, a good one, not the family lawyer who's been covering for them, about removing myself as a signatory from the company accounts, about protecting myself legally from the debt and the bankruptcy that's coming." "That's smart. That's the right move." "Alfred, there's something else." She sat down across from him at their kitchen table, the table where they'd eaten 1,000 meals together. "The prenup. I want to void it. I want to tear it up and never look at it again." "Flores, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted firmly. "Not because I think we're getting divorced. Not because I feel guilty, though I do. Because it was signed under false pretenses. Because you deserved independent legal counsel and didn't get it. Because my parents lied about our financial situation when they had you sign it. Because it's fundamentally unfair, and it represents everything wrong with how my family treated you from day one." She pushed a document across the table, and Alfred saw it was a new agreement, professionally drafted and thick with legal language. "I had an attorney draft this. It's a post-nuptial agreement that actually treats you fairly. Community property, shared assets, equitable division if we ever did split up. Real partnership based on equality, not my family's money and control. Real spousal support provisions that recognize your contributions to our marriage." Alfred stared at the document, emotion tight in his throat, making it hard to breathe. "Flores, you don't have to sign it now," she continued quickly. "You should have your lawyer look at it. Make sure it's really fair. Negotiate terms if you want. But I wanted you to know that I'm serious about changing things, about being the partner you deserve from the beginning, about building something real instead of the illusion we've been living in." "Why?" Alfred asked, his voice rough. "Why now? Why this?" "Because you showed me the truth when you could have used it as a weapon," Flores said simply, meeting his eyes. "Because you gave me agency when you could have taken control and destroyed me. Because you're a better person than anyone in my family ever gave you credit for, including me, and I hate that. And because I realized something important, I don't want my mother's life. I don't want to be someone who manipulates and controls and lies to the people I love to protect money that doesn't even exist. I want to be someone who tells the truth, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Alfred reached across the table and took her hands, felt them warm and solid and real. I want us to work, I really do. But we need help, real counseling, with someone who specializes in couples dealing with family dysfunction and financial issues. We need to rebuild trust that's been broken on both sides. I know, Flores agreed, squeezing his hands. I've already found a therapist. Dr. Sarah Morrison, she specializes in exactly what we need. First appointment is next week, Thursday at 6, if you'll come with me. I'll come, Alfred promised. They sat in their kitchen holding hands across the table like they used to when they first got married. And for the first time in weeks, maybe years, Alfred felt like they were actually seeing each other clearly. Not the fantasy version where love conquered all. Not the manipulated version where her family pulled the strings. But the real, flawed, complicated truth of who they were and what they'd built together and what they might still become. It wasn't the ending Alfred had imagined when he started this journey. There was no courtroom victory, no devastating revenge, no public humiliation of his wealthy in-laws who'd treated him like dirt. But there was something better: honesty, choice, two people deciding to rebuild on solid ground instead of beautiful lies. 4 months passed. 4 months of therapy sessions where they learned to communicate honestly instead of avoiding conflict. 4 months of Flores establishing boundaries with her parents, standing up to Patricia's attempts to control her life. 4 months of Alfred learning to trust again, slowly, carefully. Richard Whitmore died on a Tuesday in April, with his family around him, the cancer finally winning the battle he'd fought so bravely. The funeral was small, tasteful, and tense. Patricia barely spoke to Alfred or Flores, her face a mask of controlled grief and barely suppressed rage at how thoroughly her carefully laid plans had unraveled. Whitmore Enterprises declared bankruptcy 4 months after Richard's death, exactly as Jennifer's projections had predicted. The company was liquidated, assets sold to pay creditors, employees laid off. The Whitmore name that had meant something in Chicago business circles for 40 years reduced to a cautionary tale. Patricia had to sell most of her property holdings. The Lake Forest estate went to pay debts, the vacation home in Aspen, the condo in Miami. But the house Richard had left specifically to Flores in his will, the one property legally protected from company creditors, that remained. It wasn't the grand estate Patricia had lorded over, but it was substantial, paid off, and entirely Flores's. Flores grieved for her father intensely, but felt strangely liberated by the loss of the company and the fortune that had defined her family for so long. She took a position at a different gallery, the Morrison Contemporary, one she'd earned on her own merits through her work and her reputation, not her family name. The salary was $60,000 a year, a fraction of what she could have made in Austin, but it was hers. She'd earned it herself. Alfred kept his engineering job at Morrison Technical, kept contributing his $98,000 to their household, kept building the career he'd always wanted. And slowly, in therapy sessions and long conversations and small acts of daily honesty, he and Flores rebuilt something stronger than what they'd started with. The 1967 Mustang that Richard had left to Alfred sat in their garage. They'd moved to the house Flores inherited, sold the Lincoln Park place that had never really been Alfred's anyway. The Mustang was cherry red, a classic, worth about $40,000, according to collectors. It needed work, lots of work, but it was beautiful. Alfred worked on it on weekends, teaching himself the mechanical skills his father had once known, working on cars in Taiwan before immigrating to America for a better life. Sometimes Flores sat with him in the garage, handing him tools, asking questions about how engines worked, learning to be present in the messy, unglamorous work of building something real with your hands. One Saturday afternoon in July, grease-stained and tired and happy, they sat on the garage floor drinking beer from bottles, admiring their progress on the Mustang. The engine was nearly rebuilt, the transmission restored, the bodywork coming along. "Do you ever regret it?" Flores asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Not fighting for more in the divorce that didn't happen? You could have taken me for everything when you had the chance. Could have gotten half the trust fund, $4 million. Could have demanded spousal support, property settlements, all of it. David said you had a strong case. No, Alfred said simply, meaning it with his whole heart. Because this, he gestured at their modest garage, at the Mustang they were rebuilding together, at their complicated marriage and uncertain future. This is real, and I'd rather have something real and honest than something expensive built on lies and resentment any day of my life. Flores leaned her head on his shoulder, and he could feel her smiling. I love you, for real this time. Not the fantasy version I fell for 7 years ago. Not the version my parents wanted me to see. The actual, complicated, imperfect, grease-stained you who chose honesty over revenge. I love you too, Alfred said, wrapping his arm around her. Same way. The actual you, not the Whitmore princess I thought I was marrying. The real woman who's brave enough to choose truth even when it costs everything. They sat in the garage as the sun set through the open door, two people who'd lost almost everything except each other and found that was enough. More than enough. It was everything that mattered. 6 months later, Flores was pregnant. They hadn't planned it, but they weren't trying to prevent it either. When she told Alfred over breakfast one Sunday morning, they both cried, happy tears this time. Tears of joy and hope, and the terrifying excitement of creating new life together. We're going to do it differently, Flores said, her hand on her still flat stomach. Our child won't grow up thinking money defines worth, won't learn to judge people by their bank accounts or their family names. No, Alfred agreed. They'll grow up knowing that the most valuable things, honesty, respect, real love, those can't be bought or inherited. They have to be built carefully every single day. Patricia sent a card when the baby was born. A boy they named David Richard Jones, after Alfred's best friend and Flores's father. The card contained a check for $50,000 and a note that said simply, for his education, from his grandmother who loves him. It was Patricia's way of apologizing without actually apologizing, of trying to build a bridge without admitting she'd burned the original one down. Flores cashed the check and put it in a college fund, accepting the olive branch for what it was. Life wasn't perfect. They still fought sometimes, still had moments where the old patterns tried to reassert themselves. But they fought honestly now, with words instead of manipulation, with mutual respect instead of contempt. They built a life that looked nothing like what either of them had imagined, but felt more real than anything they'd ever known. If you enjoyed this story, like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's choosing truth over deception, respect over control, and real love over comfortable lies. Alfred Jones learned that the hard way, standing outside a hospital room, listening to his worth being calculated in dollars, and finding out he'd been married to an illusion. But in losing the fantasy of what his marriage was supposed to be, he gained something far more valuable. A partnership built on honesty, equality, and the messy, beautiful, difficult work of seeing each other clearly and choosing each other anyway. The Mustang still sits in their garage, nearly restored now, a project they work on together when David Richard is napping. Some weekends they make real progress. Some weekends they just sit in the garage drinking coffee and talking. The Mustang a patient reminder that the best things take time to build, that restoration is possible, that what's broken can be made beautiful again with enough care and honesty and love. The most valuable inheritances aren't money or property or family names. They're the lessons we learn about who we want to be, the choices we make about what matters, and the courage to build something real, even when the fantasy would be so much easier to maintain. Alfred and Flores chose the hard path, the path of truth and reconstruction and real partnership. And in doing so, they found something her family's millions could never buy, a love built on solid ground, tested by fire, and strong enough to last.